There are a ton of great reviews for all the latest and greatest tech and gadgets here on YouTube. It's a rightfully popular content creation area, as there is always someone looking to buy, or if you're like me, just like to keep up to date with the latest news as a passion. However, I feel like most people aren't buying every marginal upgrade for each device that they have, and when it comes to computers and laptops in particular, it's critical to get some good mileage from your rather expensive purchase. That's what this video will be about. What you can expect from an investment on a MacBook Pro in particular, and what my experience has been like with the late 2016 MacBook Pro. Although it wasn't the first USB-C Apple notebook, it's arguably the device that Apple used to double down on USB-C. It's been a couple of years now since Apple made their now infamously controversial changes to their Pro lineup of notebooks. You don't need me to get into all the details of the changes, it's already been extensively covered by now. But since I imagine there are some people ready for an upgrade now, and with diminishing support for the previous form factor, I'll briefly cover what you can expect if you're now in the market. Personally, I tend to be an early adopter of technology for better or worse. There are a few details that have been improved on since the first iteration of the MacBook Pro's redesign, so I'll try to call those out as I go, especially if you're looking to purchase one of the newer models. Obviously, the first couple of things that you'll notice is the slimmer design, the space gray color option, and the all USB-C ports. We'll get to that later because that's going to be our biggest talking point. There's a new butterfly switch keyboard that has been updated in the newer models, the larger trackpad, and the touch bar. A couple of smaller changes that are welcome are the solid built-in speakers and the brighter LCD display. Other than that, the only other noticeable difference is the lack of a backlit logo, which used to be the signature mark of all Apple notebooks. But to be honest, it's one of those things that I got over almost immediately. So, with the obvious changes out of the way, let's start off with things I personally liked. So here's my setup. I have the 15-inch model with a 2.7 GHz i7 4-core. This is the Skylake generation with boost speeds up to 3.6 GHz. I did upgrade to the Radeon Pro 460 with the 4 gigs of VRAM, 16 gigs of memory, and a 500 GB hard drive. I'll start off with probably the most common thing people enjoy about Macs in the first place, and that's Mac OS X. Ain't nobody got time to get into the whole Mac OS versus Windows versus whatever version of Linux that you're running. Chances are, if you're watching this, you already are in some form in the Apple ecosystem. And if you're not, there are plenty of other videos that do a better job of comparing OSs for your needs. As a creator, I do prefer using Apple software products for creating my content. That's what this video is being edited on. And if you're new to content creation, at least for video editors and musicians, GarageBand and iMovie are pretty good introductions, not to mention free, to creation software before you're ready to graduate to professional software such as Final Cut Pro or Logic. These are Mac OS exclusive programs, and because of that, it allows Apple to really optimize their software to the hardware that they themselves are also creating. So much so that at least in these examples, it can even outperform some Windows machines running Adobe Premiere or Pro Tools. Now, while performance is definitely something you need to consider before you make your purchase, the large appeal to Mac OS and its software is also in its relative simplicity, at least compared to Windows and certainly compared to Linux, as well as its relatively long support life. I'm currently running Mac OS X Mojave on my 2016 MacBook Pro, and it still runs just like the first time I opened it. Of course, the software you are using takes up the majority of your experience as a user, and Apple does a relatively good job of keeping everything uniform across its devices. While this is primarily a look into their notebooks, the experience that you get from using other Apple products in conjunction cannot be ignored. It's the reason Apple enforces so many standards on its developers, although there are some drawbacks to that. Although that's not to say that you can't install any third-party software not found in the Mac App Store. Again, the simplicity of just getting something done without a huge learning curve is the appeal here, and I'm no different in enjoying it. The trackpad has been highly recognized, and I feel no differently. It's one of those things that you didn't even realize you wanted until you start using it. Now I can't imagine going back to a smaller trackpad on a different notebook. For example, I use a 2015 MacBook Pro at work, and the difference is truly night and day. Scrolling, gestures, navigating is nearly luxurious with the trackpad at this size. It really makes multitasking so much easier, and once you learn all the gestures, it's like second nature. So on the rare occasion that I do find myself using the Windows notebook, it's a jarring experience and kind of a setback. The taptic feedback of the clicks are super realistic, and while it did feel a little bit odd at first, its nice and quick feedback are extremely responsive. The trackpads Apple makes are pretty much perfection in my opinion. Now, I'm personally a little bit of an audiophile, so another one of my favorite things is the speakers on this thing. For a laptop, these really get loud. Even at higher volumes, there really isn't any bad distortion that you can typically expect from speakers at 100% volume, but you don't even need to crank it up that high to hear it clearly in any small to medium sized room. These are still laptop speakers, so don't expect some super high quality sound, especially from the low ends, but those are still there, the mids are crisp, and the highs are balanced enough that it doesn't feel super thinned out when you do get to those higher volumes. They certainly get the job done if you're consuming media, be it watching videos or listening to music. The display is a 16:10 aspect ratio, which I think is a sweet spot for portable PCs at the productivity level. I think it's important to have a good amount of vertical real estate when writing, reading, browsing the internet, and working in pretty much any format. Of course, you'll get black bars at the top and bottom when you're watching videos, but hopefully you aren't buying a MacBook Pro just for consuming media. That would be pretty stupid. And there are way less expensive options if that's what you're looking for. But if you are, I'm not here to judge, but it would be pretty dumb. It's also really bright with 500 nits and has good viewing angles. Obviously, with a laptop, the entire purpose is to not always be at your desk or at home or at work, so even if you're on the go, in direct sunlight or in a brightly lit area, you can still see your screen with ease. The resolution is a crisp 2880 by 1800, so higher than 1440p, but not quite 4K on the 15-inch model, but at this screen size, it's almost like reading printed text. It's lightweight, portable, and for a 15-inch notebook, very non-intrusive when I'm carrying it around. The battery I found to be solid. I get around 5 to 7 hours under normal usage, browsing, some light work and editing, writing, etc. But if I am editing on the go or playing some games, the battery life does go down to anywhere from 2 to 4 hours on heavy use. I know Macs aren't gaming devices. There's proper gaming PC right behind me, but I like throwing down some Civilization rounds every now and then on the go. So let's get into some of the details that aren't so great. The first thing that I haven't found too annoying, but realize it's a huge talking point for a pro laptop, is the all USB-C ports. I get it, and I personally miss the MagSafe connector, but USB-C is the future, and manufacturers are actually starting to implement it. The Nintendo Switch and pretty much all its accessories are USB-C, phones are starting to use it, and peripherals such as cameras, external drives, etc. are also starting to adopt it. That being said, I'll admit we aren't quite there yet. Not to mention all the legacy non-USB-C equipment such as audio devices, camera equipment, MIDI instruments, Ethernet being huge. So people and manufacturers have resorted to dongle life. This is where I'll elaborate on what I meant by not being too annoyed by the move to all USB-C. Adapters are still necessary for some inputs, Ethernet and SD cards being the biggest two. However, outside of those two, there are USB-C cables for pretty much any input that you need. Regular USB to USB-C, HDMI to USB-C, DisplayPort to USB-C. Replacement cables is the way to go, and that's personally what I have done. Yes, I know, this is an additional cost to your already expensive purchase, which is why I left USB-C in this section of the video. But the data and power throughput you get from USB 3.1 and Thunderbolt 3 helps alleviate the pain in my opinion. I totally understand that you've already spent a pretty significant amount on this machine, and having to buy any additional items for backwards compatibility sucks. I totally agree. But since I and you probably are still deciding to go this route, this is how I decided it was best to approach this problem. So yes, you probably still need a dongle, but I've been trying to primarily use it as an additional input hub when I'm working from home, and switching to peripherals using USB-C cables when I'm on the go. Luckily, Apple hasn't killed the headphone jack in this computer for some reason, but whatever. One thing to note about USB-C on the MacBook Pro. The 2016 and 2017 models only had 2 Thunderbolt 3 connections, one on each side. This has been updated on all their 2018 and newer models, which are now all 4 Thunderbolt 3 inputs as well. If you are considering buying a used one, something to keep in mind, you lose a little bit of data transfer speeds, the ability to use an external graphics card, and probably most importantly, the ability to connect a monitor and also charge a laptop through one cable. This is just on 2 ports though, you'd still have those 2 available, but again, something to keep in mind. Now, how about these butterfly switch keyboards? They're not great. I wouldn't go as far as saying that they're terrible, but they're not good either. Typing on this keyboard was certainly an adjustment. The very minimal travel just feels bad. There's a mechanical keyboard right behind me, so you know where I stand. Once you start using it, you do get adjusted and comfortable relatively quickly, but the moment you step away and use any different keyboard, not just mechanical, any different keyboard, it's jarring. The difference truly is jarring. I don't know why Apple is in this eternal hunt to make everything as thin as possible, but this move is clearly not beneficial to anything but that. However, the biggest problem here is the risk of failure on these keyboards. I don't think the amount of failures have been as big of a deal as it seemed after the initial reports, but the fact that you even have to consider this is a pretty big negative. Apple finally did come around and offered a free keyboard service program for impacted devices, but stuff like this doesn't win over consumers, and also just feels like a crappy way of Apple avoiding to actually have to do any sort of recall for its devices. In any case, this is also something to consider if you're looking to buy used. The 2018 and newer models have improved keyboard that seems to be preventing this problem at all, but you still get the same typing experience. The touch bar has been mostly gimmicky in my opinion. I personally have found some decent use from it, and it's really up to developers to implement that into their software, but outside of like literally just more precise video editing or adjustments of certain settings when I'm creating music, I really haven't found any other use for it whatsoever. I get what they're trying to do with it, but you can't just blame developers for not developing for this feature if consumers are simply not using it. Overall, it's kind of a pointless feature and not a reason to buy this machine, but in fairness, it's also not a reason not to buy it, if that makes sense. And finally, the thing that's true about all Apple products, they're expensive. They're expensive as hell. They're not upgradable. They don't really run cutting edge technology under the hood. Pound for pound, there are more financially viable options out there. But of course, you wouldn't be on Mac OS 10. I don't even want to go with the Hackintosh route. So all you Hackintosh people, let's just not even go there. This is for your average consumer. There is a premium to be paid for the experience. But this is a judge-free zone. After all, this is a review of my personal MacBook Pro. There have been concerns with issues with thermal throttling on devices when you're under a heavy load, and I'll admit, this bad boy does run pretty hot when I'm pushing it, but at the same time, this is mostly true for all performance and pro level notebooks. That's just kind of the nature of trying to put as much horsepower on a portable device. So all things considered, I still do personally love my MacBook Pro. That's not to say that there are not any legitimate problems with this machine, but there's a reason why developers, creators, and people just looking to get going out of the box without a huge learning curve do end up buying Apple products. Mac OS 10 is a good experience, and the software that Apple specifically makes really maximizes on the hardware that they do have, even if it's lacking in raw statistical power. It's really more of a long-term investment, and the nice thing is that it holds its resale value better than any manufacturer out there. So, replace the cables wherever possible, do get an adapter for that USB-C and your camera memory cards, and honestly, just go out there and try one for yourself. If you're new to Mac OS, go ask a friend to borrow theirs, go to the library, go to the Apple Store, and just play around with it. There's nothing like actually getting your hands on the device and getting the experience for yourself. And if you're on one of the previous models, just take the plunge. There's nothing to be afraid of. I know we talked about some of the things that kind of suck about this, but I do think it's still a very good device and a good machine. I'm just a guy talking at a camera, don't take my word for it. Let me know what your experience has been like with the USB-C MacBook Pro, and if you agree or disagree on anything, I'm always up for a healthy conversation. Thanks for watching. Oh my god. Ah!